Hello, everyone. You are listening to the latest Flyers Talk podcast. I am Jordan Hall, and as always, I am joined by the dynamic Joe Fordyce. We are live at Rivers Casino in Philadelphia. And, Joe, we're going to continue our off-season discussion, and we figured let's look at our top three pleasant surprises for the Flyers this season. And on another podcast, we'll look at three disappointments, guys that maybe caught our eye for the wrong reason. So, Joe, let's get right into it. We'll go 3-1. Who do you got at number three?
I'm going to say Cam York and just the leaps his game took, because not only we know how last year went, and he didn't make the team out of camp and then came up, and I would describe his game as inconsistent last season. This season, I think it started inconsistent, and we saw Torts is a little bit hesitant to use him on the power play early in the season. And you started to think to yourself, if this guy's not quarterbacking your top power play, I don't think he's going to live up to where he was drafted and the sights that the team had set for him. And then over probably the last three quarters of the season, definitely the last half of the season, his game took a leap that I don't know that anyone saw coming, to the point where you had the coach saying, we can't go significant parts of games without him, not just him, but he was one of the people included in that they couldn't go a significant part without him on the ice. And I think that's huge. It's just because, and it's huge because the Flyers in this rebuild, they need Cam York to be that player. He was really the first guy taken, I guess, with an eye toward the future. So that, I would say, is, I mean, you have to love what you saw at the end of the season with York. And he was paired with a bunch of different guys. So it seems like he can play with anyone, too, which is another thing. A guy you can move around, a guy that can use the power play, and a guy who, he seems like one of those players when he's playing with confidence, it's a whole nother level. I mean, plays with an edge, and you can even hear it when he talks. I mean, there's a little bit of that Southern California laid-back vibe, but he's very integral to what goes on the back end for this Flyers team. So I'm going to say him at number three.
That's a great one. He's got a real California cool to him, which I think helps with handling pressure, but he also has the California confidence, which I think also helps with pressure. He's had a lot of pressure on his shoulders ever since John Tortorella got here, and I think he's handled it really well. I think a big question going into the Flyers rebuild was, would Cam York turn into a top pair defenseman? And I think he showed so many signs this year that he can be a top pair guy, which I think is huge for the Flyers. He played top pair minutes. He looks like he's going to be an answer for them, because the Flyers need to hit on these first-round picks. They need to find out what they have in their first-round picks. We all know how important picks will be to their rebuild, and Cam York, without a doubt, a real important one. Joe, I'm going to go with Ivan Fedotov. I had no clue this guy would actually be a Flyer at some point. It was really not looking promising going into the season. When he returned to the ice after required military service, and he signs a 2-year deal with his KHL club, and there's all this drama and doubt around would he ever even get here. And out of nowhere, he shows up, and he didn't surprise me with his game or anything. He hardly played, but I just was not expecting him to be a part of this whatsoever. Here he is, and the Flyers are expecting to go into next year with him and Samuel Ersson. I really wonder where the heck they would be goaltending-wise without Carter Hart and then no Fedotov. It's, there's so many questions in net, the most important position for them. So for me, it's Fedotov. I just did not envision him ever being a Flyer. And here he is. He's now signed to a contract, and we still need to figure out what he is. I still have no clue if he's going to be an NHL goaltender. He could be very good. He could be a guy that's, here for a couple of years, and it turns out he really couldn't cut it at this level. But Fedotov was just a pleasant surprise for me that I think was a major victory for the Flyers. The fact that they could get him here and get him wanting to be here and playing here for the next couple of years is a real promising surprise.
And it seems like the potential to open up the opportunity to get Michkov here quicker.
Sure.
Might be furthered by the Fedotov thing. And you mentioned Fedotov, and I'm not going to call the Carter Hart thing a curveball because I think everyone saw something coming down the pike. But Sam Harrison didn't come into this season expecting to be the starting goalie. He certainly didn't come into the season expecting to play as much as he played over the second half of the season. So the Flyers needed Fedotov to come in here. They needed the goaltending picture to become a little more clearer heading into next season, and now it has. So I think that in and of itself is a positive surprise. And the Flyers acknowledged it themselves. They put Fedotov in a bad spot. He looked good when the first time he played, and he looked significantly less than good the next time he played. But they admitted they put him in a bad spot, and they did. They didn't have a choice but to put him in a bad spot, though. So I think that is absolutely a positive surprise because now going into next season, you're not asking what your goaltending picture looks like. You know what it looks like. Sam Harrison knows what it looks like. And Ivan Fedotov knows what it looks like. And I think that's the key because you could argue that nobody knew what it looked like in the middle of the season this year going forward.
Celebrity cook Steve Martirano brings his Italian-American cooking back home to Philly. Enjoy Martirano's Prime at Rivers Casino and Steve's famous meatballs with Sunday gravy, prime steaks, and more. Make reservations for Martirano's Prime on Open Table. Joe, pleasant surprise number 2 for you. Who is it?
I'm actually going to say Yegor Zamula because I don't think we knew if he was an NHL player last offseason.
Yeah, that's fair.
And in fact, I almost feel like we kind of just like overlooked him going into the season. And this wrinkle of him playing on the power play started to emerge. And, you know, I think he established himself. I'm not going to say he's a top pair defenseman, but if he is a guy that can be relied on to play at least the third pair minutes, I think that's a win because I'm not sure you knew that heading into last season. And that was certainly something I was not expecting going in. I don't know if anybody was expecting it because it seemed like it was, like, wait a second, what is Torts seeing in this guy? He's playing him on the power play now, and he's doing this with him now. He's out on the ice at the end of games now. He's trying to preserve leads. And it was almost like gradually the training wheels came off, but it wasn't as sudden as training wheels actually coming off a bicycle.
Yeah.
And I think that is good because we all know, we look around the league and depth at the blue line it's a rarity in the NHL, but the teams that are successful are the teams that find that depth. And I think finding that Zamula is an NHL player is a huge find. Like I said, even if it's only to play third period minutes or whatever it is, that's a huge find. And if of course, it's not set in stone, but I think that was a big step forward for them. And the Flyers need as many step forwards as they can go here. And that doesn't just include guys that jump off the screen. It includes the guys that are playing second and third pair because you need those guys too. And I think they found that with Zamula.
Zamula was no longer waivers exempt going into the year, so there was a ton of chatter about how does he fit? Like, is he going to be a regular? If he's not, can they get him through waivers to go to Lehigh? Will he ever see Lehigh? How often will he have to sit, and is it bad for his development? I was pleasantly surprised, Joe, when the Flyers traded Sean Walker, and then they had a real slew of injuries on the back end, and everyone's minutes kind of went up. And Zamula, I thought, played pretty well when his minutes went up. I was a little worried that with more on his plate, how would he do? Because they kind of sheltered him for a good chunk of the year. Minutes-wise, his minutes went up, and I was pleasantly surprised how well he played. And I'm with you. I think there's still a ton of questions. I think he's still kind of raw, and there's going to be a lot of work to be done with Igor Zamula. But a pleasant surprise that he was with the Flyers all season and was able to kind of carve out a role.
Yeah, and when we were talking about him on this podcast last offseason, I think we talked about him like his days might be numbered.
Yeah.
And I don't think that is any longer the narrative with him. And what you just mentioned about playing better with more minutes, that is the common theme between my first two surprises.
Yeah.
York, his play took a leap when he had to play more.
Yeah.
So it's always good to see your younger players taking a step forward when they have to play more, as opposed to, needing less minutes to play better. Because chances are, if you become a starting defenseman in the NHL, those days are going to come where you're going to need less minutes to play better. But while these guys are young and kind of learning, it's good to see them play and excel when they play more.
Absolutely. And Joe, for number 2, I'm going Tyson Forster, another young player, scores 20 goals in his rookie season. But that's really not the most surprising part for me. It's more the 200-foot play. I had no idea that he would be this strong, this reliable from a 200-foot perspective. When he was drafted, it was all about his shot. He's got one of the best shots, but he's raw in other areas. I didn't think he'd be this strong, full length of the ice this early. He was so good that John Tortorella, he really won over the coach's trust and became one of the more reliable forwards from a 200-foot perspective for Tortorella. So I did not see that coming, and I think the real exciting thing is there are so many more goals in his makeup. 20 goals, I think he's just scratching the surface. He went stretches of the season where his scoring really dried up, and he couldn't really find the back of the net. So the fact that he got to 20, I thought was really impressive. I think there's so much more there in the tank. I think there's 30 goal potential. But really, the fact that he's able to play this well-rounded this early, I think is real promising for the rebuild.
Yeah, the thing with Forrester is last year John Tortorella talked a lot about his all-around game. We didn't have a chance to see much of it. And then there was some bits of inconsistency, but he really carved out his place in the lineup as the season went on. And he seemed a little hesitant to show us the shot that everyone talked about. And then that started happening. And by the end of the year, I mean, his goal-scoring skills are arguably the best on the team in terms of the ability to shoot the puck from anywhere on the ice. So, yeah, I think that's as key as guys like York and the back end are. I think Forrester is just as much of a key because we do know this team struggles to score. And he is going to be relied on for that. So the fact that he's in his rookie season, to me, it can only go up.
Yeah, the Flyers have long needed guys that can beat the goalie without help. He's one of them that I think is going to help in that area of need. And the fact that I think his all-around play is going to become second nature soon, to the point where he will be focused on scoring and he'll start scoring more. I think he was so focused on just trying to be reliable for the coach when he's out there, especially when he wasn't scoring. That I think will become second nature, and then scoring will be the focus. And yeah, 20 goals. I was impressed because I just thought he went stretches where we weren't seeing him score whatsoever. The fact that he was able to get to 20, huge sign for his potential. Joe, number 1, who do you got? Most pleasant surprise.
I'm going to say Owen Tippett for a lot of the reasons we just talked about Tyson Forrester with. This team needs guys that can score goals without help. Mm-hmm. We saw Tippett score the goal of the year without help. The thing with Tippett is when he becomes more consistent in terms of hitting the net, and his own coach said that a couple of times this year, we don't know what the potential is, and he's still a young guy. And I don't think that we didn't know this is the player they were getting when they got him in the trade. And I think now, rather than not knowing what they have, not knowing what his ceiling is, I think is a much better conversation than not knowing what kind of player he is. And I feel like that's where the Flyers are. What is this guy's ceiling? Look what he can do. He establishes more consistency. He hits the net more. The sky's the limit for this player. And the Flyers need a player that can drive offense. I think they have 2 of them. Well, Forrester can turn into that. Right now, it's Tippett and Konechny. And when they were out of the lineup for games, you saw it. Mm-hmm. I think you saw it more when Tippett was out, because Tippett looks like he can develop into that big-time power forward type of player. And he was that during his hot stretches, but if he can do that consistently, the Flyers have a find. Again, I keep going back to there was a lot of criticism with Chuck Fletcher and his tenure here, and rightfully so. This one he got right. He was backed into a corner on a trade, and he got the best out of it. They have a first-round pick, and they have Tippett. You can't ask for more than that, and he deserves credit for that. So Tippett's my number one surprise.
Yeah, Fletcher made out really well in that trade. I mean, Drew had a no move clause. He totally had the keys to where he wanted to go, and Fletcher still made out really well. I mean, that first round pick's coming up this summer, and Tippett looks like a huge foundation piece. Joe, when they got him, I knew he was a power forward type with some tools. I think a lot of people thought maybe he's a third liner, maybe second liner. I had no idea he would be this strong and this fast. I mean, he looks like one of the faster guys in the league. I had no idea he had that explosiveness. I mean, these are areas the Flyers have needed to, try to fill holes, and he looks like he can fill that. That's a huge win for the Flyers.
And they obviously recognized it with the contract extension, too. So I don't think if you would have said a year and a half ago, Owen Tippett's going to be this guy who jumps off the screen, he drives their offense, and he's going to get a contract extension for 8 years, you would have been like, are you sure you're talking about that guy, the same guy? So huge positive going forward.
For sure. And, Joe, for my number one, I'm going a little outside the box here, but I'm going to say Sean Walker. I did not know what they were going to have in Sean Walker, and I really never envisioned them being able to flip him at the deadline for a first-round pick. I think that's a massive, pleasant surprise for the Flyers. I think a lot of people in-house for the Flyers did not know what Sean Walker was going to provide. I thought he'd be a guy that would be fighting for games, and he solidified his spot in the lineup. He played alongside Nick Seeler and made up arguably the Flyers' best defensive pair, and they were able to move him at the deadline to supplement the rebuild. And we've all talked about how important draft capital is for the Flyers and picking up first-round picks. I did not think Walker would be the guy that would get him a first-round pick at the deadline. I had no clue that would happen. So kudos to Sean Walker. He's had a cool story. He tore his ACL and MCL on one of his knees when he was with the Kings, and that gap of playing time of him being out on the shelf created room for others to take his job. He lost his job there in LA. He became a cap dump for the Kings. The Flyers took on his contract to facilitate a trade for a first-round pick in the Ivan Provorov deal, and here he is having a career season. Flyers move him. They get a first-round pick, and he's now with the Avalanche playing in a Stanley Cup run. So that was a huge surprise to me that I just did not see coming.
Yeah, I remember last summer a group of the Flyers were at the Phillies game, and that day I happened to be filling in, producing Phillies pre and post, and I'm looking at the screen. I'm like, I see Farabee, and I'm looking and I'm trying. Who are these? Who are these other guys? And I'm like, oh, that's Sean Walker. And I was like, yeah, he's probably not going to play though much for the Flyers.
Yeah,
he was just kind of like a throw-in.
Yeah,
and yeah, to see what he turned into, and that they got a first rounder. I mean, it's just no one could have expected that.
Yeah,
and he's getting his chance to play. I mean, to be able to even crack the lineup in that Colorado team with some of the guys they have on their back end, I mean, that shows you what people think of him and think of his play this year. And he's really been an integral part since he went there.
Yeah.
I mean, I think he scored 2 goals in his first game with them.
Yeah, it's been really good.
And he looks like he's all over the ice anytime you watch him play in these playoffs. So, yeah, that's absolutely – he was quite a find for the Flyers.
Yeah, without a doubt. I remember John Tortorella saying he had to reach out to Todd McClellan, the Kings' former coach at the time, just to get a scouting report on him. But I believe I had heard that Keith Jones was pretty high on him, had always liked his game. So kudos to Keith Jones. I believe it wouldn't surprise me if he was in Danny Briere's ear saying, hey, I know we had to take on this contract, but this guy could be something. He's on an expiring deal. Perhaps, we can move him at the deadline. And I think the Flyers got a perfect scenario where he played extremely well and they could sell his value high. And they got a first-round pick for him. He'll get a payday in the offseason from someone. I'm thinking maybe in the $4 or $5 million range because he played so well. So good for him to set himself up for a payday in a contract year, coming to a team where they're rebuilding and they're probably looking at younger players. He found a role. So Walker, a big one. Joe, this was fun. We'll get into some disappointments on our next podcast, whenever that is. But it's always good to look at pleasant surprises. I think the Flyers had a lot of them, considering their season was one that I think exceeded expectations in many ways, despite collapsing down the stretch.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, take out the how. If you were to say this is how the season would go,
Yeah.
without the ebbs and flows,
Yeah.
you would say, oh, I mean, I don't think most people would believe that it happened
Yeah.
that way. Because you're looking at you're looking at the draft lottery last night, and you're thinking, well, they can only move up to the second because they can't move up more than 10 picks, and you're thinking, wow, I can't believe I'm actually saying that because no one would have picked them to finish. And then the other side of you says they're kind of in that purgatory area
Yeah.
where you're too good to get a top pick, but you're not quite good enough to make the playoffs.
Yeah.
But who knows? I mean, nothing's guaranteed with the draft picks, as we've seen in the past. So, we'll see what happens with the number 12 pick.
Indeed. And Joe, before we wrap up, I know you have a lot of connections with a lot of former Flyers that are in the middle of these playoffs. It does seem like every turn you see a former Flyer behind the bench or on the ice. What's it been like for you just to see some of these guys every single night?
Yeah, it's kind of tough to figure out who to root for in these playoffs. Yeah. I know Flyer fans don't want to root for the Rangers, but Peter Laviolette, he's looking, and we were talking about it in the office last night. I think if the Rangers to make the finals, he will be the first coach to ever lead 4 different teams to the finals.
Wow.
And when I say 4 different teams, 4 different franchises.
Yeah.
I mean, the Scotty Bowmans and, there's a few coaches that have obviously made 4 finals with 4 different teams, but the same franchise. 4 different teams, of course, it would be Nashville Flyers. He won the Cup with Carolina, and then the Rangers would be the 4th. So that's a pretty impressive storyline to look at. And when you look at that series, he's going against the guy that was the captain for the team that he won the Cup with Rod Brind'Amour, who also a former Flyer, obviously one of the more beloved Flyers of my lifetime, Rod Brind'Amour. So that's cool. That stuff to look at in that series. Of course, you have Rick Tocchet, who I would consider the front runner for the Jack Adams Award for the top coach. He has to deal with the Edmonton Oilers, so that series gets underway tonight. You have Jim Montgomery coaching the Bruins. He, of course, is the guy that named the Legion of Doom line back in the 90s, played for the Flyers. And Sean Walker, I mean, we talked about him here. He's obviously an integral part of the blue line for the Colorado Avalanche. So, I mean, there's no shortage, it seems like there never is a shortage of Flyer-ish type of flavor around the playoffs. Even you go look at the Florida Panthers, Nick Cousins playing for them.
JVR's playing for Boston.
JVR for Boston,
Yep.
yeah. I mean, it's everywhere you turn. You see that kind of stuff. So it's cool, and it's an extra interest to watching these playoffs of the Flyers connections. So I got to say, though, I'm rooting for Rick Tocchet.
Yeah.
He's the guy I want to. I mean, of course, I think he's got the toughest assignment here, dealing with the Edmonton Oilers and that high-flying attack, because Vancouver is not. They're not a high-flying goal-scoring team, and the health of their goalie is a little bit in question. So it's going to be a tough challenge for them, but we'll see. We'll see what happens. That should be a good series, though.
Yeah, I think every series just looks so loaded. Like so many entertaining storylines and players. Joe, I think we even had the pleasure. I know we had the pleasure of having Rick Tocchet on this podcast, thanks to you.
Yeah.
I think it was when he was doing TNT work between his job, obviously, with the Coyotes.
Yeah, and also
now.
when he was coaching Arizona.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we've had the pleasure of having him on. He's awesome. And what he's done in Vancouver is truly incredible. I mean, to get that team to buy in and to play the way they are with the talent that they have, I think it's just a product of coaching.
Yeah, and think about it. Last year there was such a, I don't know if I would call it controversy, but there was a lot of stuff around how Bruce Boudreau was dismissed by the Canucks, and then Toc came into this scenario where the crowd was chanting the other guy's name during the first few games, and the whole fan base seemed kind of against everything that was going on there. And then this year, they had the best record in the NHL for most of the season.
Yeah.
And just to see that turnaround, and now he's got them, making a run for the first Stanley Cup ever in franchise history. It's pretty remarkable, and we don't hear about it a lot here because it's Vancouver. But it is definitely something to keep your eye on.
I know a lot of people always say, well, there's another former Flyer in the playoffs. I find it fun. Like you said, storylines, things you can tie back to when they were here. And I don't think it's a bad thing that the Flyers are, kind of producing some good coaches and
Yeah,
people
I
around
mean,
the league.
there's nothing to say that, I'll use Craig Berube as an example.
Yeah.
There's nothing to say that if Craig Berube would have stayed here rather than go to St. Louis, that he would have won the Cup here.
Right.
Like these are not apples to apples comparisons. Like as if, well, if he stayed here, then he would have won the Cup here. It's a different mix, different situation, different town, a lot of differences. So that is a common thing you hear in this area is, well, we'd love to see guys leave and go get, win a cup somewhere else. Okay. I mean, it happens. I mean, you always heard that about Mark Recchi as a player is, well, look at, he's won everywhere he played except for in Philly.
Yeah.
That's true, but he's also in different situations. And, a bounce here, a bounce there, particularly the 2000 team, Mark Recchi's second run with the Flyers. That team was pretty close to making a run for the Cup.
I know Tockett's Flyers came pretty close too. I believe they just ran into a dynasty.
Yeah, well, Talk was on that team, the 2000
right.
team, so that was his second run with the Flyers as well.
That's right.
And both of those guys' first run with the Flyers, I mean, Tocchet made the Stanley Cup final in '87 and lost to one of the best dynasties in the history of sports.
Yeah.
And then Mark Recchi's first run with the Flyers, he had the best scoring point season in the history of the franchise, which I don't think will ever be broken.
I don't think so either.
But the team was not good that was around him. And and then he leaves and goes to Pittsburgh because Eric Lindros was here and there was kind of it wasn't a great fit. This is what I'm talking about. It's always different circumstances.
Yeah.
So to say, well, if this guy would have stayed here, blah, blah, blah. I mean, maybe not. But if you think that way about different you'll drive yourself insane.
Exactly. You can't go that route every single time you see a former Flyer, in the Stanley Cup playoffs.
Yeah, I mean, it happened, like, people said that about, I mean, Pat Burrell won a World Series here with the Phillies, but then when he went to the Giants, they went on to more success, and everyone's like, well, of course he goes and he wins, but he won here too.
Right.
So people are always looking at that. That guy was ours. Why didn't we win more with him, or why didn't we win with him at all? Type of thing. So, Mike Richards and Jeff Carter were perfect examples of that too.
Yep.
So.
And it probably doesn't. Yeah, and it doesn't help. When the Flyers have been in a Cup drought since '75. That just fuels the ammo.
But
for those people.
If you, what I've said to a couple people in recent weeks is, the Toronto Maple Leafs have not won. They are arguably the number one most recognizable franchise in the NHL. Arguably, I say.
Sure.
Because they are in the biggest city in Canada in terms of hockey. And the popularity, they've been there as an original six team. And it's gotten so bad that it almost to the point where I always think that their crowd and the pressure of that city works against them in the playoffs.
Yeah.
Could you imagine them getting to a conference finals with the pressure that would be on?
Yeah.
They can't win a first-round series. And then this year it looked like they were going to do it. They were get on a run. Boston struggles. They get to Game 7. They don't win Game 7. They lose in overtime. And think about that. 1967. The Flyers weren't even a team the last time the Maple Leafs won a cup. So it could be worse.
Yes. That's a great way to look at it.
So,
it's a great way to look at it. So, no, it's funny. We'll continue to watch the playoffs. We'll continue to, I'm sure, chat about it here on the Flyers Talk podcast and continue to look at the team's off season, which is well underway here. Joe, thanks so much. Great to see you. Great to chat with you. A big thank you to Ben Berry, our podcast producer and guru. And Flyers fans, of course, as always, thank you so much for listening to the latest Flyers Talk podcast. We were live at Rivers Casino in Philadelphia. Wherever you get your podcast, please rate and listen, and we cannot wait to talk to you next time.